In this video, I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing best-selling young adult paranormal romance author E.E. Holmes. Emily is the author of the Gateway Trilogy and the Gateway Trackers series, which are both set in the same universe. Spirit Legacy, book one in her series, has amassed thousands of reviews on Amazon and has won awards from the Chanticleer Book Reviews and Media, as well as the Independent Publisher Book Awards. She is a self-publishing powerhouse, and she's here to talk with us today about her writing process, about ghosts, about self-publishing, and also about marketing. So please join me in welcoming Emily to the channel.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you on the channel. Could you start a little bit by telling us about your books and about yourself as an author?
Yeah, absolutely. I have always been a writer ever since I was a little kid. You know, I was the one who was stealing the notebooks out of my dad's, bag from work and ripping the cardboard backing off of them and like drawing the line down the middle so I could do the pictures on the top and the words on the bottom. And I must have filled like a million of those things. So I have always loved writing, but I dove into writing as a profession almost exactly 10 years ago. I was teaching high school English at the time and theater. And I was so fascinated by what my students were reading because they certainly didn't want to read what I kept trying to give them, which was like, George Orwell and, Shakespeare and To Kill a Mockingbird and books that I love, but they were not so excited about them. But I also remember not being that excited about them myself when I was in high school. So I remembered walking around to my students and saying, but you are reading something. You just pulled a book out of your bag, you're like devouring it. Like, what are you reading? Mm-hmm. And they were all reading. It was a big moment for paranormal fiction. Yeah. I mean, it still is a big moment for paranormal fiction. But this was like at the height of Twilight, mm-hmm. It was the height of like every book had a vampire in it, or a werewolf or both, and it was having a really big moment at the time. And so almost everything they were reading was paranormal in some way. Mm-hmm. Right. And I started reading the books that they were reading because I was like, I really want to know like what this genre is about. Like, this sounds interesting to me. And so I started reading some of the stuff that they were reading. And I think we can all agree that YA fiction, even super popular YA fiction, is not always as well written as it could be. Like, if that makes sense, like, you can pick up one series and be like, oh, like that was like, I would pick up like a Laini Taylor book and I'd be like, oh, that was like so good, so brilliant. Like every sentence, you're just like, I get this. And then other stuff you'd pick up and you'd be like, I mean, the plot's there and the story's there and it's interesting, but I'm like, wow, this doesn't feel like the quality of writing that like I was wishing that kids would be reading. Yeah. So when I set out to write something for that age group, I kind of asked myself, what area of the paranormal have I not seen already, like completely saturated with other YA books? I was like, steer clear of vampires, steer clear of werewolves, I'm like, but I hadn't read a single book with a ghost in it yet. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this feels like it's vampire adjacent, right? It's like, you have to have that same suspension of disbelief. You have to have that same almost magical element to it, and that element of believing in something and making something real that most people, or at least some people, don't think is real. Mm-hmm. And I thought this feels like a nice little area that I could explore a little bit. And that's kind of how I started going down that road. And now it's been, like 15 or 16 books now. And now I'm writing full time. And so it started out with me just wanting to connect with my students and what they were reading. And now it's turned into my full-time job, and it's awesome.
Oh, that's so awesome. What is your favorite thing about the paranormal genre? Do you have something about it that really ignites something in you or draws you to it?
Oh, yeah. I love the idea that there are still things we don't understand.
Yeah.
I love that idea. I feel like as human beings, we get a little cocky especially like in modern times, like with science and with, everything, like it sometimes feels like all of the magic, all of the unknown, all of the undiscoverable, like that territory is shrinking. Like it just feels like it's shrinking every day as we come up with new technology and new ways to explore things. And, not that I'm, saying science is a bad thing. Obviously, it's great. But I'm a romantic and I like the idea that there are things that we still don't understand, that there are parts of the world that are still beyond our grasp. And I think that's a great thing that paranormal fiction does, is it gives us those what ifs. What if that isn't all that there is? What if there's more? What if there's more going on? What if that noise you heard upstairs wasn't just air in the pipes? What if it was something else? And just the idea of being able to take a what if and running with it. And I think the other part I like about it is that like I said, it feels like there's so much less unknown, mystery, magic in the world. And it's sad. It feels, I think we need that. Like, I think human beings need that. I think we need things to incite some kind of imagination and exploration in ourselves. And it doesn't always feel like reality gives us that. In fact, it rarely feels like reality gives us anything other than something else to be like anxious or stressed about. So just the idea of like a character in a modern setting, walking along, having a very normal life, and then suddenly falling headfirst into this whole world that is existing somewhere on the same plane as the world you thought you were living in. I mean, I think it's a thing we all a little bit wish would happen to us, And so I think that's what I like so much about it.
As a writer myself, I really hate this question, but I always feel like I have to ask it. Is there a way that you typically come up with your ideas or hold on to ideas as they come to you and combine them later?
There's not a specific way. I would say it's like, I'd love to give an answer that gives people like a great like way to tap into, but unfortunately, it's like, I think it's just the fact that my brain, and I think most writers' brains, are a little bit like a computer that has like 87,000 tabs open across the top. And you're always thinking about almost anything as a potential story. So it's really just a question of like, what hits you at the time. I mean, so for example, I can tell you exactly how I started embarking on the Gateway books. It was something very specific. Yes, it was a lot about figuring out what my students were reading and what they were interested in. But another really big piece of it was, I don't know if you remember, because I think there are still quite a few of them on, but there was a really popular show at that time called Ghost Hunters.
Oh, I think I've seen clips of that. I haven't.
Yeah.
I'm a diehard fan, but I know what it is.
Yeah. No, neither was I. It's funny. So there were a bunch of shows like that kind of all came out around the same time. And I started watching one by accident. I was like, what is this? I'm like flipping through the channels. I think it was on like the Sci-Fi Channel or something. I'm like flipping through channels and I started watching it, and I got like weirdly into it because I was like, I didn't understand what they were doing at first. So I just kept watching just to see like what the end game was, like what is the point? And I eventually figured out, oh my gosh, like they're using a bunch of equipment to try to catch evidence of ghosts. And I thought to myself, that's, first of all, not a thing I had ever heard of anybody doing before, but also I was like, okay, well, now I kind of want to see what they find. Like, do they actually find anything? And so I started watching some episodes of it. Like I went down this weird rabbit hole and stayed up way too late. I think because they were doing like a marathon. There were like a whole bunch of episodes on in a row. I stayed up way too late watching like all of them. And what I found was that most of the time, it's not all that interesting, right? They might find a little tiny, they might hear this noise, or they might see a door, creak, or, there's, little things that you're just kind of like, okay, like, I think we're just, telling ghost stories around the campfire and freaking ourselves out at this point, right? But then every once in a while, they would bring forward this little piece of footage or this little audio thing that they would play, and you'd go, okay, that's weird. Like in a really, in a way that you would think like that could maybe have a normal explanation to it, but I don't know. That is, if I heard that in my own house, I think I'd be like calling a realtor and being like, can you please sell my house? I don't want to live here anymore. So what it got me thinking about was really much less about whether the ghost hunters were actually onto anything, or whether they were right, and whether what they were doing was it all just a bunch of hooey, or was it, actually legitimate?
Yeah.
Really more what I thought about was, what must it be like to be a person who does not believe in any of that stuff? Like absolutely, like every fiber of your being is like, that's fake. I don't believe in any of it. And then to suddenly have your world turned upside down by an absolutely unexplainable paranormal event, like something so egregiously real, that you just can't, there is no other explanation. Like that was really the question that came into my head. What would happen to you if you were a skeptic and you ran into something where there was no other explanation except the one thing you don't believe in?
Yeah.
That was my jumping off point.
Yeah.
But it just came from like flicking through TV shows at like, 12 o'clock at night when I should have gone to bed, and I made a poor choice. I stayed up, but I'm happy for that choice now because, like I said, 15 books later. But yeah, it's just, I feel like so much of it is just about taking in the world around you and thinking about the things that really hit you, that really touch you, that really speak to you as a human being. Because I think that if you're not passionate about what you write, your readers are gonna somehow know it. And they're, I can't remember what famous writer said, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. Like if you kill off a character and you don't cry about it, like don't expect your readers to cry about it. It's like they can almost tell when you're being insincere. And so I think just the most important thing is like, if you get struck by something that really hits you in like a deep emotional place, that to me is fair game. For development as an idea. And some of them you start to develop and you're like, wow, there's really nothing I can do with that. But then others you start to develop them and you're like, oh, wow, okay, I could pull this in, I could pull that in. I've kind of always wanted to set a story here. And you start, it's like scaffolding, right? You start building it up until you have a structure of something that you look at it and you're like, okay, that could be a book, right? Because sometimes it couldn't be. Some of you are like, that is like one good chapter, or that's like a short story, right? That's what that is, and that is just something I shouldn't touch because I can't do anything with it. But every once in a while, you'll build something up and you'll look at it and you'll go, huh, okay, like this is worth at least starting on and seeing where it goes. Yeah. So yes, that's a very long answer to your question, but
no, but I'd love to follow this a little bit and talk about how you develop your books. So you have the idea and then you build it up and you put some more scaffolding on it. And then what happens? Do you outline your books? Is that your next step, or do you not outline your books?
I'm not totally consistent with outlining. Sometimes I do it if I feel like I have a plot that has a lot of strands to it that I'm going to have to bring together, like braid together in a way. And so I tend to, like, I have another series that has nothing to do with ghosts. It's a gas lamp fantasy series. It's called What the Ladies Made New is the first one. The Rift Magic Saga is the name of the series. And that was my first delving into multiple POV, third person, and bringing the story from the perspectives of different characters. And those I had to outline because it was a new structure for me. It wasn't so straightforward. I had to do a lot more like just brute outlining, and that there's nothing sexy about that. Like, it's not fun. It doesn't add to your word count, right? It's not a good time. And and I think creative brains sometimes try to like shy away from it, but I do feel like sometimes it is quite necessary. When I'm working on a book, what I tend to do is the analogy I like to use is like, think of it as like planning a road trip, right? I know where I'm starting. I know where I'm ending. and I know certain places I want to hit along the way, right? And as long as those are clear in my brain, I'll get started. And what'll happen is I give myself, because this is all part of the creative process too. If I over outline stuff, I get bored or I get stuck, and it takes the discovery out of it. And I hate that, because the discovery is my favorite part. And I'll go into more detail on that in a moment. But the way I think about it, so I've got my roadmap, I'm starting here, I'm ending here. Here are the places I know I'm hitting. And then I give myself permission to explore along the way. And of course, I don't keep everything, right? Not everything stays in, but I'm like, oh, you know what? I do have time to go over and visit like the biggest ball of elastics over here. And I do have time to go visit this weird diner over here. Like, I can let myself take little detours along the way, as long as I'm sticking to my main storyline, And I think the other thing that's also helpful about it is, I think a lot of writers get an idea, they have a beginning for a story, they start writing, and they're like 30, 40, 50 pages in, and they just stall because they don't know where the story's going. Like, I think that's the most important thing. You have to have some touchstones, and you have to have like an end point. You don't have to stick to any of those things.
Yeah.
But if you tell yourself you're going in a direction, and at least you know where it's heading, if you wind up going in another direction, that's fine. But you were on the road, you gassed up, like you had a destination, like that's the most important thing. And the rest of it's just fun, right?
Yeah.
Filling in along the way. And like I said, coming back to that, the character of Milo would literally not exist.
Oh, really?
If I hadn't done one of those little detours. Yeah, because he wasn't a part.
Funny.
He's like, I got my Milo. I don't know if you can see. I've got my Milo is my spirit guide T-shirt on today. But so he's like, arguably, we're not supposed to have favorites. They're like children, but like Milo is arguably my favorite character in all of the Gateway books. I adore him. I have a special place in my heart for him. And one of my favorite things about him is that he is a happy accident. Yeah. I just needed a way to get from point A to point B for the main character, Jess. I'm like, I needed her to be able to find a room without giving too much away as a spoiler. And I was like, well, obviously one of the people there needs to know where it is and tell her where it is.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, created this little character. He was just supposed to be like a one-off conversation. But he like jumped off the page at me. Like, as I was writing him, I just like, oh my God, I love you. And then I was like, can I do anything else with you before we're done? Because I feel like I really enjoy you very much. And then through writing the end of the book and wanting to bring this character along for the ride, it was like he was hitchhiking. He invited himself. I don't know how else to put it. And I figured out, I was like, oh my gosh, if I have him have this special connection with this other character, then all of a sudden him coming along for the ride is very natural. And then we get to have more of him and I get to write more of him. And that sounds good to me. And that is literally how that character was born. So like, you just never know, never know that exploration part of it, the detours, they're so important. Even if you wind up scrapping a lot of that stuff, like it's worth it just to dig through it to find because you might find gold, you might find stuff you want to keep. And it winds up being some of the best stuff, honestly, some of the time.
No, every time I think of Milo, I always think of that one thing that Jess said right at the beginning of book 2 about like someone this annoying has no business being dead. I just thought that was such a funny quote. It's so good. I laughed out loud when I read that. It was so funny. But when you talk about these like little, sorry.
No, I was just going to say their love-hate relationship is also one of I mean, really at this point in the series, it's really just love. But like that initial like love-hate relationship that they had has just always been one of my favorite things to write, the banter back and forth between the two of them.
Oh, yeah, it's awesome. So when you say that you have these like little touchstones on your road trip map, are those touchstones like plot points, or do you use like a different like plot outline or like an outlining structure? Are they like hero's journey plot points? Are they like 3-act structure, midpoints, or anything like that?
Yeah, I honestly, yeah. So like, I don't, it's funny because I had to teach a lot of that stuff when I was teaching English. And I find that I don't necessarily stick to it as a structure. I think of them more as, my training is in theater. That's what I went to college for. And I
also
feel
love
like
theater. I was this close to going to college for theater. Right before I
Did
went.
you? Yeah. Well, hey, it winds up being a great background for writing, as it turns
really
out.
is. It's amazing.
Yeah, but they're plot points, and I think of them as scenes, right? Almost like in a play. They're these scenes that are clear to me in my brain and that I know need to happen in order for us to get to whatever the ending is, you know. In order for them to break out of the something, we have to have a scene where they find the key to the, you know what I mean? Like they're things a lot of times that just structurally have to happen. And the reason I like having them is because when I have writer's block, I tend to write chronologically if I can. I like to start at the beginning of a story and work my way through. However, I think that if you marry yourself to that, you are much more likely to get stuck in abandoned projects.
Yeah.
Because it's like, if you don't know that very next thing, your brain just like short circuits if you can't figure it out. Where actually what I find is I'll say, okay, you know what? I'm stuck right here. I don't know what to do with this. I know I need to get to this next milestone. That is clear in my head. I'm going to start writing that. And a lot of times what happens is when I start writing that next milestone, the back of it just kind of fills itself in. Like in my head, I'm like, oh, okay. So if they are here, then I can write a scene, you know, I could use a scene in the car that will get them there. And then I can introduce this plot point, or I can introduce this. And then it's weird. It shouldn't, it shouldn't work that you could write like something that happens later and it helps you figure out what happens before it. But I swear it works.
It bridges the gap between the two things that you've already written.
Yes, exactly. It's like if you can see this place and this place, then it has to come between them. Like this is the only thing that's going to work to get you from here to here. And it's like the biggest piece of advice I give people when they ask me about writer's block. I was like, skip what you're doing. Like, don't make yourself go chronological, because 9 times out of 10, if I ask them how they write, they say they write chronologically. They always just write the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And I'm like, sometimes that just completely screws you over and you can't, you know, you really do have to skip ahead. And I think it really works. It works for me in any case.
So what does your drafting process look like? Like how many drafts do you typically do when you're drafting? Do you set like daily word count goals? Are you a fast drafter, or do you do 0 drafts? What does that process typically look like for you?
Sure. So I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm like a one and done. I edit as I go. I tend to edit as I go. I tend to edit as I go. I go back a lot and change things, but typically speaking, when I write that last scene and I hit the end, that's aside from, you know, going back through and editing it, I'm not, that's the draft, and it's either going to work or it's not, you know what I mean? And I think by that point in the process, I figured out like, this is the story. And I'm sure I'm going to have to go back and tweak things, but like, I've never started from scratch on a draft ever.
Wow.
There was one time. So when I was writing Spirit Legacy, I originally wanted to write it as a Victorian Gothic ghost story because I love historical fiction. Love. And the thought to me was, I took this idea of the, I'd been reading a lot of Libba Bray at the time. And so my head was very in like this very romantic Victorian sort of headspace. And I thought, ooh, ghosts, you know, Victorian England, this sounds fun, right? And I started to put those two things.
It's like the perfect kind of old historical ghost story.
Yes, exactly. They're trying to put those two things together. And I started writing, but I was teaching full time. I was a theater director. So I was on top of teaching and grading, I was directing 3 shows a year with my students. Like my work days were insane. And I got to a certain point in the book and I realized that I did not have enough time in my life. If I was ever going to get this book done, I did not have enough time in my life to do the research I needed to do. The whole thing was full of these little bracketed, like, look up how many, what the back of the corset is supposed to look like, look up and they were just these little menial things. Like, they weren't even like the heart of the story. They were like, I have to write a scene where she puts her boots on and I need to know, would she put her own boots on? Would a lady's maid put her boots on? How would they do that? Did they have one of those things they stick in the back and pull it on your foot? Would they lace it? How do they lace it? Do they, it was like, oh my God, I could spend a whole day just researching how a wealthy Victorian era woman puts her boots on. I'm like, I don't have time for this, right? And so I scrapped it, and I had probably 100 pages of stuff, and I scrapped it. And I said, I still love this concept so much, but if I am ever going to write this book, I need to stick to what I know and where I know. And so I wound up setting it, near Boston, which is where I grew up. And then at a college out in the Worcester area, which is where I went to college. And like, everything just became so much easier. The general concept was exactly the same. The idea of the Durpainen, the idea of the skeptical character who finds herself thrust into this world, even the idea of Evan. They originally met at a ball on a balcony, and he was asking her to save him a dance. And then, this whole thing with the dance card, and then she's looking for him and it's like he left, and then she asks somebody and they're like, oh, so cool. Didn't you know? So that was like the original idea. And I had that whole scene written and I loved it. But I scrapped it because I realized, I was like, I am shooting myself in the foot with this story if I bury it so deep in research that I can't get it done, that I can't write it. But the nice thing is that now that I've established the world of the Durpainen, and I've established that they do go all the way back through all those eras, it kind of opens all these doors for me. Like, oh, okay, spin-off series. Like, I already have like a little bit of an outline going for a possible spin-off series, all with Durpainen, but a totally different, clan set in a totally different era. And, but it's all in the same world. So I can use a lot of the world building, a lot of the structure that I already established in the other books. And I can literally just take it and just drop it in another timeline and then play with that and see what that does. So I guess in the end, it just became a very deferred version of the story. But, I didn't know at the time I would ever go back to anything in that era. But it was just how it happened. That was the right
technology that you used. If you had it set in this kind of Victorian era, because you have the kind of more ghost hunter, like they have the different, like the infrared sensors and the different, like.
Oh yeah. So it's such fun stuff. So it's not really technological. And to be honest, I hadn't got to, in any major way, I hadn't gotten to that part of the story because that's so close kind of toward the end and I hadn't gotten that far, but I had been diving into, the Victorian era was famous for seances and these people who would, and I'm so looking forward to kind of diving into all this because I think it would be really fun. People would host these seances, and a lot of them were, of course, elaborate frauds and schemes, but in this world, maybe some of them weren't, right? But having the idea of spiritualists and people who were trying to do things like call spirits, bring the family members of the dead around a table and try to, get messages sent from the people on the other side. So it's almost like it wasn't so much technology then, it was much more spiritualism. But of course, with that comes people who are trying to scam people, and then people who genuinely might have gifts. Like I feel like the Annabelle character would have carried straight through beautifully. The whole idea of like the tarot card reading in the tent, like that whole scene traveled really well. And my thought was that, Jess and Annabelle would hook up in that sort of sense where she would go and find her and say, I need you to conduct a seance in this space or what have you, you know? So it was like, I was diving more into like the spiritual underbelly of Victorian era. I mean, it would have been very fun. I'm still going to play with it at some point. It just had to get put on the back burner, just like practically speaking.
Oh, that's so cool. What,
Yeah.
so you mentioned that you self-edit as you go when you write. What does your editing process look like? Like, what do you look for when you're self-editing? What kind of edits do you do? And then do you work with an editor after you're finished with your draft?
Yes. And I think it's one of the most important things I can tell anybody who's thinking of putting a book out there. Invest in a good editor. You know, you have to know what kind of editor you want. Like, I don't work with a developmental editor. You know, that wasn't what I was looking for. I was like, if I go trad pub, that's what they're going to give me. I'm going to get a lot of rewrites. I'm like, I don't want my editor to give me more work when I'm just, you know, working as an indie. Like, this is my stories, how I want to tell them. You know, if I ever came to a project where I felt like I was in very uncharted territory genre-wise for me, or perhaps structure-wise, I think that I would definitely consider using a developmental editor just to like make sure I'm on the right track. However, with what I'm writing now, because I've been writing in the same genre for the same audience for 10 years, I feel pretty good about structurally what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure it's as like clean as possible.
Yeah.
Like just clean, clean, clean. And you can be like the most, you know, I mean, I find typos in books all the time, but my eyes will skate right over them in my own stuff. Like, is it a curse? I don't know. Like, I don't know, but
I'm still finding typos in my books. I've had like, my editor read through it in full like twice before it was published. I had a proofreader. I worked with a developmental editor just for They Stay. And everybody missed the typos. Like I was finding like double periods. Like last week, I'm still like going and re-uploading the files and fixing things.
I just reload. Well, and that's a beautiful thing though. You can fix them and re-upload them, and everybody from that point on won't know about that typo, and that's brilliant. But what I have come to learn, and I soothe myself with this every time I find a typo in a traditionally published book. It does not, and I have the last 3 traditionally published books I read, I found at least one typo. Oh, wow. And I was like, it makes me feel so much better, because what you need to always tell yourself is that like nobody's perfect. Editors are not perfect. You know, your writers, nobody, like you are going to miss something. Like if you just make your peace with that fact before you get started, like, you know, I just released an audiobook, and my audiobook editor, got back to me when she was done and said, you know, like recording's done. Like I'm just in the editing phase now. Like, you know, blah, 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 logistics. By the way, I found these 3 minor typos while I was reading, and I wanted to tell you about them so you could fix them. And I was like, and they were like, you know, a sentence that didn't have like a close quotation mark, right? I mean, they were like super little, but again, how many, and I have beta readers. I have like 10 people I send the book out to, who are people who are close to me, who have read all of the books. Because really what I'm looking for from them is like, can you see any inconsistencies in world building stuff? Have I broken any of my own rules and I didn't notice? Because I've done that before and had to go back and like fix things real quick. More stuff like that, because the further you get into a series and the more world building you've done, the more stuff you have to remember, and your brain cannot possibly hold it all. So I keep hoping one day some reader is going to get really excited and make me a Wikipedia page, and then I can look up all my own stuff instead of having to go back through my books every single time. Because at this point, I'm like, I literally don't even know what book that was in, let alone what chapter it was in. It's like so bad. But yeah, I think editors are super important. I work with a great freelance editor who I actually go really through 2 editors. One of them is an informal editor. She's just a good friend of ours who happens to do editing and enjoys the books. So she offers to go through them as a beta reader, but also she's really good at picking up those little tiny things.
Yeah.
But I also have like an editor that I, pay, and it is money well spent. Like, don't skimp on the editing, because people will stop reading your stuff if it looks unprofessional and if it looks messy. And because there's, like I said, indie publishing means that anybody can write a book, get a cover file, and upload those two things. And there it is. Like, your book exists, like that people can read it. And that means that there's a lot of stuff out there that has not had the eyes on it that it should have. If you're planning on like actually making any kind of like career or building any kind of readership, and you don't want to get a reputation for, oh yeah, the stories are really great, but oh my God, like I just couldn't, because that's what drives me nuts when I read. And it drives a lot of other people nuts too. And you don't want to, alienate readers just because, you want to save a few $100s. I'm like, spend the few $100s, like you'll make it back from readers if your stuff is in better shape.
Yeah, definitely. How do you approach because you say that you edit as you go, do you like keep a running list of things that you have to do as you're editing, or like how do you edit as you go? Do you start the day with the edits and then keep drafting afterwards, or how do you balance that?
It depends where I am. I tend to go back and edit at the end of a chapter. Like I tend to, like when that chapter is done, I'll go back through first, just read through it a few times just to try to get the shape of the chapter in my head. Sounds like a BS answer, but chapters have a shape to them. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. Like, if you read enough books, you just you get the shape of a chapter. Like it has a shape, and you just have to make sure the chapter has the shape that you want. If it sets things up appropriately for the next chapter, if it, if you're supposed to tie anything up, did you tie it up? So I tend to I use writing software called Noveler. I don't know if you have heard of it. I think it's a fairly new software, but it has a notes section at the bottom, and I just keep a running list of notes for myself with chapter numbers and things. And some of them are literally just go back and figure out how to spell this clan name that you haven't used in 5 books that you now have to use. Go back and look up the name of the, like things like that I don't want to break my stride while I'm writing to like stop every 2 seconds and go look stuff up. So I'll put little bracketed notes in for myself. And then at the end of the chapter, I'll go through and I will either take care of those in the moment, or if I can't, because I know I've got too much, like I have too much writing to do in the next chapter that day, I'll just add them to that notes section. And then as I go through, and then when I am getting ready to format, which I use Vellum for, it's gorgeous, isn't it? Yeah. And I actually have only just started using Vellum. I used another software and it got bought out, and it just I really liked it, and now it's gone. So, so I'm like, okay, over to Vellum we go. Had to get a MacBook. That was fun.
I know. I just got a PC for Dragon because I wanted to learn how to dictate. So now I have the 2 writing computers. I'm trying to figure out how to sync the Scrivener files in between my Mac and the Dell computer, and everything is
such a pain, isn't it? I'm like, oh, Vellum. I'm like, please for PC.
Yeah.
They won't do it. They just won't. But in any case, that writing software I use allows me to export my chapters separately from each other. And each chapter, they're drag and drop, which I also love, especially when I was writing multiple POV and I wasn't always sure which order I was going to want those chapters to go. And I could literally just drag and drop them into different orders. And then, oh my God, it was it's so beautiful. Yeah. But the thing that I like about it is that when I'm getting ready to, send that draft along for, over to Vellum to be edited, to be formatted, I tend to go back through the book chapter by chapter, and each chapter gets another final pass before each one is sent over individually to vellum to get formatted and all of that. I don't do it all in one big chunk. I think that's too hard. I think if you try to combine like line editing with formatting, it's like, I mean, it gets super stressful, in my opinion. So I like to kind of keep those two things as separate from each other as I can. Of course, there's always more edits to do after you format it. That's when you find like the 100 things you thought you'd already found, right? But at least you're not going through and like restructuring paragraphs and like adding in dialogue because this part doesn't work, or this, you know, this needs a little more setup or whatever. You know, that stuff needs to be done before it goes over to editing or formatting, or I just find that it just gets too messy and complicated.
Yeah, I always find the typos as soon as I format it. Like it's something about seeing it on the formatted page in the format.
It's like someone waved a magic wand over it and you were like, oh, wow. Those definitely don't exist over here in my writing software, but somehow magically they've appeared. Yeah. Every time. It's, you know, it's just the reality of it. And you just have to sigh and just fix what you find and fix the stuff that other people find later. Like, what else can you do? At least the beauty of the indie format is that you can do that. So
no, it's true. So pivoting a little bit now into talking about ghosts and paranormal systems and world building, which I'm super excited to talk about, as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview. First, how did you go about creating the system of ghosts that you used in Spirit Legacy and in the Gateway series? Did you start writing before you came up with the way that the ghosts work, or did you figure out how the ghost system had to work in order to tell your story, or did you figure out your story first and then go backwards? How did that process happen?
Almost a little bit of all of those things. So with the first book, first of all, I didn't know I was going to wind up writing the number of books in the world of the Gateway that I did. Like anybody else, I'm like, I'm going to write a book, right? That's like, you know, and I did have it as like a trilogy in my head, but I'm like, let's like one thing at a time, right? Let's get this first book done and then we'll see what happens. And so I knew I needed to establish basic rules about like what ghosts could and couldn't do. And I knew I didn't want those rules to be too limiting. Because you can write yourself into a corner sometimes if you make your view of things too narrow, or you don't allow for, you also have to allow for ways to break rules later, if that makes sense. So like, because you may come up, because a lot of the tension comes from having your world built a certain way and the characters in it think they understand it that way, but then something breaks one of those rules.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And now it's like, okay, that's not supposed to happen based on what we already know about the ghosts and the this and the that. Now the focus of the book becomes, you know, how did that rule get broken? Where's this loophole? Can we plug it? You know, is it a sign of things breaking down, or has this always been here and we just didn't know it? Like, is it a process of discovery? Like, I feel like a lot of times by inverting a rule or turning it on its head, you can create a tension in your world that you wouldn't have otherwise if you just followed them all the time. That said, there are a lot of times where like the rules, like rules is rules, right? And like you have to, like, you're going to have to write within them. You're going to have to, you know, make certain decisions and stick to them. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, wow, I really wish I didn't make that rule because this would be cool, you just kind of have to let that go and say, yes, it would be cool, but we can't do that because the readers will yell at us. So we're going to do this, right? We're going to do this instead. You just have to problem solve it. So I think probably the first things that I established was just what ghosts could potentially do, like I said, and I didn't want it to be limiting. So I really played with the idea. And I mean, honestly, nothing I came up with about how the ghosts interact with the world are exclusive to my books. You know, there are so many theories about ghosts and, you know, poltergeists and all these things. It's like these phenomenon, they already exist, right? All of these things already exist. So it's just a question of which ones are you going to pull in and use in your universe of ghosts, right? Which of these things do you want your ghosts to be able to do? And I thought it was important for ghosts to be able to materialize in a way that they were visible, but they didn't always have to be. Like, just because you can see ghosts doesn't mean a ghost is always going to let you see them. I thought that was important to establish. The idea that ghosts can move things or touch things, and really trying to establish that using the idea of poltergeists, right? A spirit having the kind of energy, power, whether it's emotional or whether it's whatever, and using that energy to affect the world around them, right? But bearing in mind that they can't do that forever. Like, if they do it enough, they're going to be exhausted. Like, they're going to have to almost like recharge themselves. You know what I mean? Like, they can weaken themselves just like a living human being can weaken themselves. Right. So I just, I tried to establish those rules as much as I could in that first book. And then of course I had to develop the world building of the Durapine themselves and what that whole secret society looks like and has looked like. I feel like that was even more complicated than coming up with the rules for the ghosts, because I felt like rules for ghosts, like throughout the course of pop history, are kind of established. It's just a question of which ones you want to cherry pick and use. But the Durapine, of course, that was not that the idea of people who can see ghosts and help them cross is new, but but my version of that was new, and it needed to be. Yes, I spent a lot of time, pages and pages of just stuff that I was like using to establish my rules for myself, the history, how the clans fit together, how gateways work, how they don't work, and the castings that were involved and all of that. And it's like simultaneously exhausting, but so fun, because you really do have to. It's almost like research. It's research you make up, right? It's like you're creating your own research, and you have, but then once you've created it, you always have it to refer to. Yeah. You always have it to come back to. Like, that's your touchstone, right? Like, this is the world I created. This is how it works. Any stories I write have to exist within this framework. And in some ways it's helpful. And in some ways, once in a while, you're like, oh, like, I'm really actually kind of annoyed that I established that rule, because now I have this other idea and I can't use it. But like I said, the rules are there for a reason, and they provide the structure to the world that you're building. And it does have to have a structure. Like, readers can tell when you're just making it up as you go. Like, as much as we are making it up as we go, like, that's literally what we're doing. But as far as having no plan, not referring back to your own rules, your own, what you've previously established, like, you have to stick to that stuff. Otherwise you're just going to be in big trouble.
Yeah. So in your opinion, what differentiates a scary ghost story from a not scary ghost story? Like, what would be different? Is it the understanding of the ghosts, or are there different things that authors can do if they're trying to make their ghosts scary to make them scary, and then differentiate it if they want them to be friendly?
That is a really good question. Let me see. So, there have been moments in my own books where I wrote them and I thought to myself, okay, wow, that scared me a little. I kind of wish I didn't write that right before I went to bed. Yeah. I think particularly of the ghost of the little boy who shows up in Spirit Legacy.
Oh, yeah.
Over her bed with the water dripping. That I think a lot of what makes ghosts scary is the unknown about them. Mm-hmm. The fact that they're still a mystery. Like, you see them, but you don't know who they are. They interact with you, but you don't know why they're interacting with you. They are behaving in a certain way that is disturbing. But even though the explanation for that could be a not scary thing, the result is a ghost behaving in a way that scares you because you don't understand why they're doing what they're doing, or who they are, or why, and I feel like what makes ghosts scary to people is that element of the unknown. Yeah. The more a character knows about ghosts, is comfortable around ghosts, the more knowledge they have, the less freaked out they get. And if that's the character that's driving the narrative, you as the reader is going to be less freaked out too. It's like, I'm with Jess. She does this all the time. Like, we're good, right? Yeah. She's going to figure this out. Mm-hmm. It's when a ghost shows up that presents them with a real, like, whoa, what was that? I think of the Silent Child from the second book. It's like, they think they know how to communicate with ghosts, and yet here they find this ghost they can't communicate with, right? It's almost like anytime a ghost sort of violates the established norms of what these characters think ghosts should do or how they should be, that I think is where a little more of the fear comes in, because that's what makes us as not Durapinen, right? That's what makes us sometimes be scared about ghosts, is the not knowing. You're not sure. The more knowledge you have, the less scary anything is, right? Yeah. So that, I guess that's did that make sense? I feel like I kind of talked in a circle there, but but that's I think that's the big part of it. Mm-hmm. Ghosts for humanity in general feel like a mystery that needs to be solved. Yeah. And when you have somebody who knows a lot of the solutions, that takes a lot of the fear part out of it. Because I didn't set out to write horror books, even though a lot of people are like, oh, like this part gave me nightmares, and I'm like, I don't even watch horror movies. Yeah. I really don't. I'm like, I don't like them. I'll read horror books because I feel like as a reader, I can control my visualization of what's going on. I mean, every once in a while, a writer will use a turn of phrase that I was like, even I can't imagine my way out of how visceral or specific that is. But for the most part, I can visualize things in a way that I can handle them and process them. Whereas if I'm watching like a horror movie, it's like, now I'm watching somebody else's interpretation of what that means. It's just being like thrown at my eyeballs, and there's nothing I can do about it, right? So like, I think that there is something inherently scary about ghosts, but I think there's always a way to, you know what I think it is? I'm going to take everything back. Not exactly. Take everything back.
That was such a good answer. That really made a lot of sense.
No. And yeah, I mean, stick with that. I think that's, I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is when we humanize them, they become less scary.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah. It's like the ghost, you don't know who the ghost is. You don't know why they're there. You don't know why they're doing what they do. But when it comes down to it, they were a person. Yeah. And so if you think of them as a person, all of a sudden it becomes less scary.
Yeah.
It's just a person in another form, right? And a lot of times when people don't have a lot of experience with ghosts, their minds go to darker places when there are things that they can't understand. Ghosts become a not human thing. And for people who are more in tune with them, it's like they're just people. They've lost the ability to communicate the way they normally do, and now they're doing what they can, like the rest of us, right? Just trying to get by, have their voice. And if you think of them that way, then all of a sudden, a lot of the scariness kind of goes out of it.
Yeah, I know that was really well said. That really like crystallized how I think about it in my brain, because I agree. I think a lot of it has to do with the unknown. I think that a lot of horror is centered around the unknown. If you're like relatively powerless against this thing that you don't understand, it's really like viscerally scary. But as soon as it's like, oh, this person or this ghost is a person, they innately become less scary. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. I mean, and don't get me wrong, there are some people out there who are like terrifying, right. But a lot of times I think the things that make ghosts scary are just the not knowing, right? Yeah. Who it is specifically, why they're doing what they're doing. And once that gets kind of demystified, a lot of the fear goes out of it. Yeah. If you move into a house that's haunted and, you're able to find out enough about the ghost in the house, then all of a sudden it's not like, oh God, the evil entity in my house. It's, hey, Todd, how you doing today? I see you rearranged, the glasses on the shelf. Do you not like the way I do them? Should we do those again? Like it just somehow becomes less scary. Yeah. So yeah.
No, definitely. And now pivoting a little bit to self-publishing, and because I have a bunch of members of my audience on YouTube who want to or have been self-publishing books, and I'd love to ask you a couple of questions about how you approach self-publishing.
Sure.
How often do you release books, and do you have a strategy for, have you ever done rapid release or anything like that?
I am not a very fast writer. I know people who are like, I wrote 5,000 words today. And I'm like I can't, like my brain, I mean, like very, very rarely. And only if I was like up against a deadline would I have an output like 5,000 words a day. Like that is insanity to me. And I also think that getting as many words on the page as possible doesn't always, I feel like you're going to wind up having to scrap a lot of that. And I feel like for me, I'd rather get 1,500 really good quality words on the page, knowing that this is the draft, right? Like this is the story. And when I get to the end of it, I'm going to be done. And I would rather focus on that and do that and have days with lower word count than spew out as much as I possibly can, not knowing even how much of it is like gonna stay or be, you know, I feel like I would delete most of that the next day as just like total word salad. So I typically release 2 books a year. So a book, just about a book every 6 months. And because of lead time with editing and marketing and getting stuff out to beta readers, like you have to build all that time in as well. So like you don't have 6 months to write a book, right? You've got like 4 probably. I've also started doing paperback pre-orders through Barnes and Noble. They've just started doing that.
Okay.
They've never.
That does. I thought Ingram was your only option for paperback pre-orders.
No, Barnes and Noble does them now because Barnes and Noble does print on demand. So, and because Amazon doesn't offer paperback pre-orders, I was really excited to find an option to do paperback pre-orders because inevitably any release information or email that I would have would always be something to the effect of, when's the paperback going to be out? And I'm like, it's going to be out on the same day. You just can't pre-order it. And I felt like a broken record. I was like, and I hate that you can't pre-order it. I was like, I don't want to punish you because you like to read books in a physical fashion. I mean, I consume books in every way. I love my Kindle. I love paperbacks. I love hardcovers. I love audiobooks, like just whatever, you know, and as much as I'm a mood reader, I feel like sometimes I'm a mood consumer of books too. I'm like, I think I want to listen to that one, or I think I want to, you know, I'm going to throw that on my Kindle and I'm going to, you know, whatever it is. So I'm getting a little off track, but what I'm saying is that, you know, your lead time, you always have to build in an extra 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks to make sure you have time for the editing pass, you know, all the formatting. You know, you don't want to get it uploaded and then suddenly find out there are all these issues and then, you know, you have to take it back down and it's a little brutal. Like if you wind up pushing back, like if you have a pre-order date and then you wind up pushing it back, they won't let you do pre-orders anymore. For like, I think it's like a year. I don't know if they've changed that, but it's you basically get punished, you know, if you set a pre-order and then you don't stick to it. So it's always a little scary setting a pre-order date because what I tend to do is release a book and then I say, and if you liked that, you can pre-order the next one, which I have not written a word of. So yay!
I just did that too. It was really nerve-wracking.
No, it's terrifying. That feeling doesn't go away. I'd like to tell you it does. Like however many books later, I'm like, this will be the one. This will be the one I don't get done. I'll get stuck. It's good. But like, you've done it already. You've done a few now. Like, you'll be fine. But like that feeling, like it low key hangs out, like no matter how many books you release, it never goes away. I'll let you know.
You're rushing too, like when you're really rushing to meet your deadline. And I mean, with my book, I was just right down to the wire, like 2 weeks before, still editing and still making all those changes. And all of my arcs were delayed to like with Barnes and Noble printing because of all the holiday shipping, and it was a disaster. And then I finally got it up for release date, and I realized that I'd published the paperback with the wrong paper color. So I had to unpublish the book and then get a new ISBN and republish it and go through all of the whole rigmarole with Ingram and everything. It was just such a nightmare.
The back end is enough to make anybody be like, I don't want to write books anymore. Like, it's that stressful. Like, I guess I probably oversimplified it earlier, right? When I was saying like, oh, like, you know, just write something and then get a cover thing and upload it. I mean, you can do that, but if you're going to do it
really seriously, there's so much that goes into it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So I really, like I said, a book every 6 months. I really try to hit like 1,500 really good words every day. I don't always write on the weekends, but sometimes I have 2 kids, you know, I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. So like, they go off to school and this is when I write, like, this is my writing time, and anything else I can get on top of that is usually just gravy. Like, so I try to, you know, 1,500 words is a good day. 2,000 words is a great day. I can get a book written in my 3 to 4 months. I'm editing as I'm going, like that's included in that time. And I try to put a book out every 6 months. I also shoot myself in the foot a little because for whatever reason, I can't seem to write a book that's less than 90,000 words. I like can't physically do it. Like, I've tried. I'm like, but there's more story. I'm like, is this just how long my books are? I guess. I don't know. But that always makes it hard too. So I'm like toying with the idea with this next series of really trying to just pare it down just a little bit. Like, if I can keep them to like 75, maybe like that, you know, and I just kind of set that. I feel like that's easier with a new series than it is with a series you've kind of already established. Like, that there's a certain pacing to the story, and there's a certain, I mean, it's not that every book has to be exactly the same length. It doesn't. But I think there's a certain amount of story you expect from a series when you've been reading it for 12 books. And you just, you know, I don't want to veer too far off from that. And I have also never physically been able to. So we'll see.
It also builds too. Like, the story gets bigger with every book. Like this last one that my draft that I sent to my ARC team was 140,000 words. I was writing it and I was like, why won't this book ever end? Like, this draft is taking forever.
Right. It feels like this like train that's like gone out of control on the tracks. And you're like, I mean, it's like, I'd like to stop, but you know, it's too late now, you know. It's like the amount of story that's left is the amount of story that's left. And so I feel like the only thing I can really do is go back and pare down in that first 2/3, because that back third, once you've hit, you know, you've launched, like that's I mean, the stuff that happens is happening fast, it's happening, you know, hopefully it's exciting. Like, you're not going to be able to pare anything down toward the end. You're going to have to go back to that first 2/3 and take out what you can, or not. I'm not telling anybody to I love books I can really sink my teeth into word count wise. When I see a book that's that big, I'm like, oh, you know, like that's great, right? I'm like, oh, there's so much in there for us. I can't wait. But you definitely, like, if you're trying to keep, there is also like certain expectations in certain genres of what the word count is going to be like. And if I were writing like 130,000 word, you know, contemporary romance novels, like, people would be like, get to the point, lady. Like, you know, this is ridiculous. But the way in the genre that I'm in, I feel like there's a little more room for slow burn. Paranormal speaking as opposed to romance speaking, right? Like, there's, you know, there's time to string it out. The anticipation is part of what helps build that, you know, nervousness, the fear, the what's going to happen, you know? So, it's hard sometimes to get the story to behave, you know, in the shape you want it to, but sometimes there's just that much more story to go, and you just got to write it. And that's just them's the breaks.
So how did you approach building an audience when you started self-publishing? Are there any tactics that you use to really start building a readership?
It's actually astonishing how different it is now from when I started. I honestly don't even know if what I told you about what I did then would even be helpful. But there are still some things that hold true. The first thing is that you have to market.
Yeah.
People hate marketing. People just want to put their book out there and be like, but it's there. There's my book. Why isn't anyone reading it? Well, it's because no one knows about it, right? It hasn't been put in front of anybody. And especially as an indie, you're not going to get that space in the bookstore, right? You're not going to get on that front table of new releases. And that's too bad, because I feel like, it would be great if every bookstore had a table of like new indie releases. Like, you'd be shocked how many people are reading those. Like, come look at some of the numbers. Like, if you're looking at what the number of copies that mid-list authors in traditional publishing sell versus what I sell, I sell more books in a month than most of them sell in a year.
Yeah.
And it just comes down to marketing. And traditional publishers are not putting the kind of money into marketing that they used to. Or maybe it's not that they don't put the same amount of money, but they concentrate it differently, right? They decide who the big, who the next whoever is going to be, and they push those books to the top and they throw all the money at it, and all the rest, everybody else is just trying to keep their heads above water, right? Trying to get people to find their books. So when it comes down to it, unless they've decided you're the next, Sarah J. Maas or something, like, you're going to be doing your own marketing. Like make your peace with it, and that's why in a lot of ways, indie is more appetizing to people, because you're like, well, if I'm going to be doing all my own marketing anyway, and I can get it edited and I can get it formatted and I can get a gorgeous cover, what am I paying you? Like, why am I giving you however much of my royalties, right? If I'm just going to wind up doing all this work myself, might as well get that bigger royalty share and market it myself. So, marketing is huge. Social media marketing is huge in particular. I tell people that if they're going to run ads for books, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok is a great space to be in right now as a writer. Assuming TikTok is still going to exist. I don't know. It's kind of in a strange space right now legally. Not Twitter. Twitter it's like screaming into the void. It's not made for marketing. So I do not recommend people try to throw money into that space. Snapchat too, I find not super helpful. But a lot of social media marketing. And then the other thing I recommend people do is build an email list. And having a monthly newsletter. Do not spam people with a million emails. Like, they will unsubscribe so fast. But once or twice a month, when something big is going on, or once a month when there's not a lot going on, once a month, a little teaser from a book, a little bit about here's my writing process, here's my progress on this, blah, 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 maybe run a giveaway, but a solid once a month check-in with people who have signed up to be there.
Yeah.
I don't think it's always super helpful to get emails through gimmicks, because you're just going to wind up with people who never open the emails, and they pad your numbers, but they're not going to result in actual sales. So I always tell people to really just try to build your email list organically. Have a link to sign up for it anywhere, that you can get it. If you can get it into the back copy of your ebook, do it. If you can, whatever you can do, and incentivize it too. If you sign up for my newsletter, write a short story set in the world of your books, something that somebody could read even if they hadn't read the book yet, almost like a prequel story, right? Get that ready to go. Say, hey, if you like this, sign up for my newsletter and I'll send you this prequel novella for free, right? And then, and over time, you just want to build that list up slowly. And then every time you have a release, you've got the numbers there for your book to show up, to tickle the algorithm, to maybe get one of those little orange banners. It's building that readership that you then keep in touch with, and always make sure you're notifying them when you've got a new release, when you've got something coming up. And it's a slow burn. You're not going to build it really fast overnight, but it is worth it. It's worth putting the time into building a good email list.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are there do you do promotions on Amazon? Do you do like the Kindle countdown deals or free promotions?
Yes. I have found over time, I'll occasionally give the book away for free for like a day. I will say that if you're looking to actually like make any decent money with writing, your best bet probably out of the gate for your first project is to write a series. A series with enough books in it that you get read through, so that you're advertising one book. It's like I definitely don't break even on advertising book one of the Gateway books, because that's my loss leader, right? I promote I throw so much money at advertising that book, and I count on the fact that once they read that book, they're going to be hooked and they're going to read straight through. And that's how that advertising pays for itself, is with read through. So I don't want people to get frustrated. Oh, I'm advertising the heck out of this book, and like I feel like a lot of people are reading it, but I'm still not making money. It's like just don't. I mean, books don't cost enough. You're not getting them to buy $120 thing. You're getting them to buy something for like $2.99 in ebook, right? And it's like it isn't enough of a buy to make all that marketing worth it. But if you've got a series or a good backlist of books, right, just a bunch of stuff, right, that you can hook people with that first book, and then the read through is how you eventually start to see a return on your investment, right? Is when people they click on the ad for that first book, but then they buy the second one, and they buy the third one, and then they sign up for the email list, and then they're on the fourth one, and now they want to know when the fifth one's going to be out. Like that's where that becomes worth it.
Yeah. And so do you do Amazon ads, or do you primarily do Facebook ads? Because I get your Facebook ads all the time.
I do Amazon ads as well. Yep. And I've done BookBub ads before. BookBub, I think, is always worth it if you can get a BookBub, one of the spots, for their releases. They're very hard to get. I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I think I've only had a couple. But still, because they're worth it. They really are worth it. But I encourage people, like, just apply. It's saturated. You won't get a lot of them, but even if you just get one, it's a really good booster. And if you have a really great sales day like that, it's amazing how it starts to show up in other places, because BookBub is one of those things where, based on BookBub, there are other smaller newsletters and reading groups and things that like share the things from BookBub. So you get all this like extra trickle down. It's really, it's definitely worth it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me for so long. I've really enjoyed chatting with you about all of this stuff.
I know, I did too. It's so nice to talk shop. Writing is a very solitary job, and you don't always get to talk about it and geek out about stuff. So I always love doing this stuff, because it's nice just to talk shop for a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Do you have any last pieces? Like what's your best piece of advice for somebody that would want to write YA and potentially self-publish?
I would just say, know what the heart of your story is. Don't lose sight of it. Keep it in you, and refer back to it anytime you feel like you're getting lost. You need to have your why, right? Like, why am I writing this story? What does this story mean to me? Why is this story important? Why am I writing it instead of some other story? That will keep you on track.
Yeah.
With getting through your project. And then after that, I would just say, don't read the reviews unless you have to. It's like, stay out of the comment section, right? Like, anybody who values their mental health, like, just, stick to the numbers, stay out of the comments as much as you can. Don't take them too seriously. I've sold hundreds of thousands of books, and I still get trolls in my comments. They're just people with nothing better to do, right? And so, just try to ignore that noise as much as you can. Stick to the why of your story, and and have a little faith in yourself. Like, we're all just out here banging around with imposter syndrome. Like, none of us, no matter how many books, this is always like, well, this is it. This is what I do to myself every time. Okay, Emily, this is it. This is the book where it doesn't come together. This is the book where everyone goes, you have no idea what you're doing. You actually can't write. Oops, we were mistaken this whole time. And they all unsubscribe, and that's it. And my brain does that to me with every single book. And you know what? That's okay, because it keeps me honest. It keeps me focused. It keeps me gives me that little edge of fear that I want to make sure I'm doing everything to the best of my ability. But it doesn't go away. So just try to be louder than it. Okay. There are plenty of people out there. You don't need an MFA to be a full-time writer. You don't need a storied career in literary magazines and whatnot before you embark on the writing of the next great American novel. None of those things need to be true to be a successful or popular or prolific writer. So if you love it and that's what you love to do, you are a writer. So just go for it.
Awesome. Well, that's very good advice. And where can people find you online?
Oh my goodness. Yes. So eeholmes.com, probably the best place to start. That's my website. It's got links to all the different books, every format of everything. I am on Facebook and under E.E. Holmes, and on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter under author E.E. Holmes. And yeah, pop over and say hi, and if anybody who, got to watch this or listen to it has any questions, like, don't be afraid to reach out. I actually do answer my own emails. Like, it's actually me. I do not have a personal assistant. I wish I did. I have a lovely husband who helps me with a lot of the back end stuff, but I do, if you write me an email or a message or something, that will be me that responds to you. So if anyone has a specific question that didn't get answered here, feel free to reach out anytime.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I will stop the recording.